Hello, my name is John James and I am a writer and campaigner for male victims of female perpetrated domestic violence and an advocate for men's mental health. This week on FTD Talk, Nick will be talking to Rob about his abusive relationship, and it's a very intense and detailed chat today, so I must warn you that we do talk about abuse in detail, and we also talk about suicide ideation. So if you think you will be triggered by these subjects, then please don't watch. You have to take care of yourself. Those of people who do watch, then I wouldn't say enjoy it, but I would say I hope you find it interesting. But before you go, please don't forget to hit that like button, smash that subscribe button. The bigger the channel gets, the more people we can help. So everybody out there, take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and don't forget, don't let anybody make you feel afraid. Peace.
So good day. Welcome to this latest edition of FTD Talk. My name's Nick. I'm your host for today, and we've got a great guest called Rob Wells. And so, Rob, would you like to quickly introduce yourself?
Hello to everybody watching FTD Talk today, or maybe listening on a podcast. I'm Rob Wells, the founder and director of Domestic Abuse Business Support, better known as DABS, the home of the Bridging the Gap project. I'm a veteran, published author, and I'm a survivor of female perpetrated domestic abuse.
No, yeah, that's great. FTD Talk, we like to be advocates for people such as yourself, Rob, male victims at the hands of female perpetrators. So looking forward to hearing your story. I know that your story is out there. You're on social media, so if anybody does want to catch up with you on social media and other outlets, Rob, how do they find you?
If you search me under Robert S. Wells, there's a very famous singer called Robert Wells, apparently.
Yeah, I've discovered that.
Yeah, people complain that they kept getting him, so he's far better looking than I am. Certainly got a better singing voice. So yeah, just search under Robert S. Wells or under Domestic Abuse Business Support, and I'm likely to come up. We're on all platforms, including YouTube. So yeah, please do check us out.
Brilliant. Thanks for that, Rob. That's great. So obviously, for any watchers, listeners that don't know about your story, then Rob, what briefly is your encounter with abuse? Then how did you come into contact with it, and how did it work out for you?
So I think one of the crucial things for me is along with many others working within the sector, is to just try and raise that awareness that really, truly anybody can become a victim to domestic abuse, regardless of your age, gender, sexuality, ethnicity, religion, ability, or disability, etc., etc. And I really genuinely never believed that I could become a victim of domestic abuse. I had dated one lady many years ago, and she had 2 weeks prior to me meeting her, she'd actually been put in hospital by her husband, who'd beat the living daylights out of her. And I remember thinking, I had that this is back in the 80s, and I had that opinion, well, do you know what? Why don't you just pack your bags and leave? Yeah. And certainly, as a military police officer at the time, having attended countless domestics, there wasn't one occasion where I ever walked into a house and considered that the man could be the victim. Never. Wasn't even on our radar. And not just me, but colleagues as well. It was always that old thing, well, pack your bags, love, and leave, and you two keep the noise down. We don't want to be back here again tonight. That was the attitude. And I look back at that and it horrifies me, really. I'm really delighted to see, with the talks that I've been giving to the military and the military police and civilian police recently, that things have moved on hugely since I left in 1998. So that is great to see. So at the time, having left the army and become a security professional, my whole life, it's having been military police for 13 years and then going into the personal and corporate security sector, helping to look after high net worth individuals. I was an incredibly confident person, both personally and professionally, and would never, ever have imagined that I could become a victim to domestic abuse. I always thought that domestic abuse victims were kind of weak-minded people with low self-esteem. They must be, to put up with that. How wrong I was, because decades later, through a mutual friend, I bumped into the lady who went on to become my abuser. I remember her walking into the room and thinking that she was the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen. I mean, I just couldn't believe how stunning she was. And, I kind of set my sights really on winning her over. And because I was so confident back in the day, I managed that. So, and I was delighted when she agreed to go out. But really, all of the red flags were there right from the word go. 10-foot high neon signs, they're my red flags. They were all there. But
so what type of red flags are we talking about then? What would you say they were?
The fact that she had a young son at the time, a very, very young son, and she'd had to give him up to go and live with his grandparents in Scotland because her partying lifestyle meant that she struggled really to look after herself and mind a child.
Right.
So that was number one. Number two, she was married, but her husband was working away at the time overseas, and she claimed that they were going through a divorce. Very quickly found out that he didn't think that was the situation.
Right.
So she was lying to him as well. There were always other men hanging around the house. You turn up, there'd be a guy just leaving, you'd leave and there'd be another guy turning up. There was always, and she was, every single night she was out, and it wasn't just drinking, it was heavy drug taking, mainly cocaine. So she was a big drinker, a big consumer of cocaine. She was a very overtly sexual person. So yeah, all the warning signs were there. But after seeing her for a short time and there being a number of issues already, one day I just said, you know what? I don't need this grief in my life. I just don't need it. I said, let's not go any further. I'm not going to bother seeing you again. The following day, I think it was, or a couple of days later, she's on the phone threatening to kill herself. And during that conversation, she revealed something that had happened within her childhood. It's not my place to reveal that here, but it was truly shocking.
Yeah.
Now, she was known for not being honest and upfront, but I was worried enough about her with her threats to commit suicide and what she just told me that I thought I should talk to her parents. So I phoned her mother, who I got on quite well with, and I told her, I said, look, she's threatening suicide, and I think the problems we're seeing are all down to what happened in her childhood. And my mum said, well, what problems? And there was a very uncomfortable pause. I said, what, you don't know? You don't know what happened? I have no idea what you're talking about. So that was in a difficult position then. But I chose to tell her mum and repeat what she told me.
Yeah.
And it turned out, initially her mother didn't believe it, but it turned out to be true. Now, I made a decision, a very poor judgment call, that I was going to then stand by her. I thought, you know what? When she's sober, we have a good time. She's good fun to be with. But if this has happened to her, then what she needs is a good man to stand by her, who's going to treat her well and show her that not all men are like that. That was a big mistake. That was a huge, huge mistake. My ignorance of domestic abuse, even though I'd been a police officer for 13 years, really tripped me up there. But anyway, that's how it all started. So I made that conscious decision very early on to stand by her, and one thing led to another before we were, living together eventually.
Can I just ask you there, Rob? It's a bit of a watershed moment, that was sort of standing by your partner. And it's something that, from my personal perspective, I can completely relate to what you've just said, because I had a very similar scenario with my story. Have you come across that with other people that you spoke to that suffered abuse? And I'm talking mainly men, where you think there has been a similar sort of thing, like a watershed moment like that, where they've decided to stay in the relationship, to stand by her and things like that. Is that something you've come across before?
Yeah, it is actually. I've had a couple of, after I do my talks, quite often people come up to me and disclose their own stories. And there has been a couple of people that have come out with very, very similar. Although I would say the majority of people I've spoken to, both men and women, it's not so much a watershed moment. It's particularly for men, it's the children that are involved. You know, they know that the odds are, men know that the odds are stacked against them these days, and that by leaving, you know, they're probably not going to see their kids or have very limited access. They're going to lose the home, etc., etc. So I think for most, it's that creeping realization of where things are going to go that cause them to stay. Sure. And of course, for women, you know, quite often, and for men, there's that fear. You know, we all know that leaving is actually the most dangerous time. So yeah, people stay for many, many reasons, but I have had a few people say, yeah, there was that watershed moment.
Yeah. So you decide to stick by her, and then what's kind of the next part of the story then?
So we continue to see each other, and eventually, she did separate from her husband, who was abroad. She clearly had that in her head all along, although he wasn't really briefed up on the situation. And she moved away, but she invited me to move with her. Now, I had my own business at the time. I had my own home that I'd been living in for 8 years, which was rented, but I'd been there for 8 years and was very comfortable there. And it was a big decision, a huge decision. But I decided to go with her. And I have no family in the UK other than my now youngest daughter. So I did. I gave up my home. I moved in with her. And another huge mistake, because as soon as that happened, boy, did things escalate pretty rapidly.
What do you mean by escalate?
The violence in particular. You know, I was told this will be a new start. You know, we can move away from the area where all my bad influences are. We'll get a nice place, and you know, this will be the new me, and you know, I'll be a lot happier. And literally within days of moving there, one of the first things she did was punch me in the face so hard she actually broke her hand.
What was her reason for punching you in the face, Rob? If you don't mind me asking. Can you remember?
So
that's pretty dramatic, isn't it? Punching somebody in the face.
Well, I mean, she was drunk. I mean, is that any old excuse, you know, normally? But we both been out to the local pub, getting to know people and getting to know the village. I left. She didn't want to leave. And when she came back, you know, it was that old. She was absolutely. I was going to say pissed as a fish, but I can't say.
Yes, you can. It's okay.
Oh, she was incredibly drunk, and she was. We were in the bedroom. It was all getting a bit heated. I turned around to walk away. I put my hand on the door handle to the bedroom, and as I went to open the door, she said something. I turned around. As I turned around, she literally hit me right here, right on the forehead. Luckily, not on the nose, because she would definitely have broken my nose. But she hit me here. With a clenched fist, and actually hit me hard enough to knock me to the floor, and she broke her hand. Now the next day it was clear that her hand was broken, and she
blamed you for breaking her hand. I bet. Did she blame you for breaking her hand?
No, I wouldn't say she blamed me, but she asked me to take her to the hospital, and I refused point blank. Absolutely refused. I said, no, why don't you phone your mother, get your mother out here. Now mum only lived just down the road at the time, so her mum turned up, and of course she said, well, how did you do this? And she just stood there looking at her mother, and I said, go on, tell her. If you don't tell her, I'm going to tell her. And then it all came out. She was shocked, but I later found out she'd been through this kind of thing before with her daughter, because she'd actually broken ex-husband's nose on one occasion. So that was one incident, and it wasn't long before the neighbours were calling the police. I got arrested on one occasion by Wiltshire police. Later got a personal apology from an inspector who came round to the house whilst my partner was out working. When I asked him to put it in writing, he refused. Not surprisingly, he said that officers required further training and were going to be further trained. That kind of thing. But it was the old thing. Whenever police turned up to the situation, I was always treated as the perpetrator. She was always treated as the victim. Same old that we see all the time. And this was just the very beginning. There was actually an incident prior to me moving in with her, which the police got involved in. But, the worst, we actually moved away from there eventually. And she shifted the blame and said, once we've been there a while, it was, I need to go to Scotland. I need to get my son back because that's what's causing all my depression and my drinking. If I can get to Scotland, I can get my son back and everything will be okay. And eventually we moved to Scotland. Now, prior to moving, her parents actually got together and said, look, we need to speak to you. So I went to meet them and they literally begged me not to go. And her mother's words were, if you go, she is going to destroy you. That's her mother's words.
Wow.
But I went anyway. I said to them, well, if I don't stand by her, who's going to? And I moved. And I later helped her mother to move up to Scotland. So we moved up to Scotland, and again, I mean, this time it was far worse. We were living in the middle of nowhere, a small village in the middle of nowhere, in this huge cold house with no central heating. It was awful. And if I thought the abuse was bad before, this was a completely different level now. And we did get a son back, but it changed absolutely nothing whatsoever. So yeah, it was
give us a flavour, Rob, of the types. So obviously you've already mentioned she punched you, but give us a kind of like a typical day in the life of a victim to your ex-partner. Then what was the kind? Give us other men listening, or women victims for that matter listening. What constitutes the abuse that you suffered? Give us all the warts and all.
So eventually I learned that there was a pattern to her behaviour. So it was always the same, always involved drink, sometimes drugs. She used to drink most days. And the pattern would be, first of all, she'd be the happy, cheerful, playful drunk, that everybody loved and everybody adored. She was hilarious. And after a brief period, that would then turn, she would then become overtly sexual, even if there were other people in the house. She would do, I'll give you an example. One day, there was a number of people in the house. She disappeared off upstairs. I thought she'd gone to the toilet. And about 10, 15 minutes later, she suddenly appeared at the doorway wearing nothing but thigh-high boots and a G-string, basically. And I was horrified, and I tried to take her to one side, and I said, look, you are going to deeply regret this in the morning. You go upstairs and put some clothes on. It was just a torrent of abuse, you boring this, you that, just, you can imagine, just a torrent of abuse. She paraded up and down the living room for about 20 minutes or so before then disappearing and putting some clothes on. And then after that kind of behaviour, then it would normally become physical, normally after people had left. One of the things, because I learned to recognise the signs, one of the things that I started doing was trying to remove myself from the situation before it became physical. So I always remember the very first time that this happened. And again, we were in the living room. There was nobody there, but she was drinking heavily. She started to get quite nasty. And I said, look, I'm going to go to bed. I don't want any trouble. as I walked out the room, I could hear her screaming at me, calling me all the names under the sun. Went to bed, fell asleep, and I sleep with earplugs in because I'm quite a light sleeper. And the first thing I knew, it was obviously pitch black in the bedroom. She was on top of me, punching me repeatedly in the face. So she was sat astride me, literally raining punches down on my face.
Wow.
And that kind of became one of her favourites, really. So, you know, you're talking sleep deprivation. You don't want to go to sleep, but you've got to try and remove yourself from the situation.
Yeah.
There are still things that happen in that relationship that I genuinely can't talk about, just because, to be honest, I'm too ashamed to talk about them.
No, sure.
You know, I allowed us to do things that were so outrageous that there are some things I still can't talk about now. But yeah, that became one of her favourite things. I remember one time in the kitchen, I was cooking a roast dinner. She was drunk. I remember, threatening me with a knife, holding a knife up to my face. So yeah, and the just the constant, name calling and putting me down, and the domestic abuse in the workplace. Basically, what she used to do is, on a certain day of the week, I worked at Scotland's version of Broadmoor, and we had a large control room with lots of CCTV. And at the desk that I used to sit at, we used to typically do 1 day a week in the control room, and the rest of the time out in the grounds. Right. So she would always ask, "Oh, what are you on today?" After a while, I stopped telling her. I would make something up. But the first couple of times I was in the control room, she would phone in on the control room. So it was a landline, because you weren't allowed mobiles in there. So she would phone in on the landline. Obviously, I'd pick it up, introduce myself, and it'd be her. And it always seems to be the first time, because then afterwards it just, it happened so many times. But the first time it happened, she said, she started off with, "Oh, it's me. You're such a loser, and this, that, and the other. I've decided it's not going to work out between us. And by the time you get home tonight, all of your stuff will be out on the driveway. So you need to sort something out now. Get yourself a van, get yourself home," knowing full well that I couldn't just up and leave work, particularly in a high security environment. And then I'd get home, there'd be nothing on the driveway, and it'd be, "Oh, you're so effing pathetic. I can't believe you even believe that." So you'd stew for the whole day thinking, "Oh, Christ, what am I going to go home to?" And then you get home to just a torrent of abuse telling you how pathetic you were for believing it in the first place.
Wow. So was she ever like, so was she only like this when she was drunk, or was she like it at all sober? So was it the drink that fueled it purely, or was it, do you know what I mean? Was it always after she'd had a drink or drugs?
Yeah, look, I'm no psychologist. I don't know anything about that. But thinking back to what happened in her childhood, I think she just saw men as a way to get what she wanted, what she needed. I always thought that the more I gave her, emotionally, financially, physically, I thought eventually she'd realise I wasn't like all the others. And one day she'd wake up and realise that I was a good guy. But actually, the more I gave, the more she took. And
I'm sure there's a lot of victims. A lot of victims, when they hear what you've just said, will be nodding their head, going, "Yeah, yeah." Sorry, mate.
Most of the time when she was sober, she was okay. Not all of the time. And when she was sober, she did do, in particular, the couple of things that I can't talk about. Those were decisions made when she was sober.
Okay.
But on the whole, the worst of it came when she was drunk. Although saying that, one of the worst incidents was actually when she was sober, bizarrely. But that was after our child was born. When she fell pregnant, some very strange things happened. eventually, it was bound to happen, but eventually she did fall pregnant. And overnight, literally overnight, she became a different person. And for the entire pregnancy, it was like living with a different person completely. There was no physical violence. There was nothing. There was no abuse either.
All right. So she changed for the positive. She changed for the positive.
Like that overnight,
Yeah.
completely.
Yeah.
And it became the relationship that I always hoped that it would become. And honestly, for 9 months, it was bliss, absolute bliss.
Okay.
I mean, we'd actually.
Is that because she stopped drinking? Because she was pregnant and she stopped drinking?
Yeah, possibly.
Taking?
Yeah, possibly.
Yeah.
She did. Yeah, she did stop drinking. She didn't do any drugs or anything like that.
Yeah.
So I mean, possibly that's the reason. But it was bliss. It really was, and I was ecstatic. I was ecstatic that I'd hung in there, and we were very excited about planning for the birth of our daughter. And yeah, it was amazing. It was really amazing until about, I don't know, a couple of months, I think it was, until after our daughter was born. And then literally the world came crashing down. So in what was definitely one of the worst moments of my life, really. So our daughter was, as I say, a couple of months old maybe. And she was, my partner was giving her some medicine in the kitchen. And unfortunately, as she put it in, our daughter inhaled the medicine and started to choke, like really badly choke. She started to go a really horrible colour, couldn't breathe at all. My ex had hold of her and was running around panicking, as you would imagine any parent would. So I said, look, give it to me. I know first aid. Give it to me. So she handed her over. I had her literally, I was bent over, I had her upside down, I was patting her on the back. And as I was trying to clear her airway, I was struck really, really hard on the right-hand side of my face, which knocked me to the side. Bearing in mind, I still had my daughter in my arms and I was trying to, upside down, trying to clear her airway. I just instinctively pulled her into me just as another punch, and obviously very quickly realised what was happening. And then it was just an absolute rain of punches on my face, body. And I didn't think about it. I just instinctively covered our daughter over, and whilst at the same time trying to stop her from choking. And it was such an incredibly overpoweringly stressful moment. And after all those months of bliss, and thinking that, all that abuse was over, here I was being attacked whilst I held my daughter. And I was obviously terrified for her that she was going to get hit. And I was screaming out, to think about our daughter. I'm trying not to use her name here.
Sure.
And I mean, it felt like an age. It was probably literally only a minute or so. But, I must...
Why do you think she was punching you at that point? Like what?
Well, that all came out later on, because this was too much for me. I couldn't deal with it. And basically, what happened was, a couple of days later, I went into work, and
first of all, please tell me your daughter was okay.
Yeah.
Okay, right. For you,
she was absolutely fine.
Yeah.
I mean, in the melee, I'm doing all of this, moving around.
Yeah.
The blockage cleared itself, and thankfully she wasn't hit.
Yeah.
But a couple of days later at work, I had a complete breakdown. I literally with my manager, I collapsed to the floor in this busy work corridor. I was literally curled up in a fetal position on the floor, just sobbing like a child. My manager was stood over me. He had absolutely no idea what to do, what to say. Eventually, and there was people walking up and down the corridor. Eventually, I calmed down, got to my feet, and he then suggested, I think you should go to occupational health. Being the organisation it was, we had a big occupational health department. I went there, and for the first time, it all just came spilling out. So yeah, I mean, I was in a really bad place at that point. You know, I was so concerned about our daughter, and I just couldn't cope with it anymore. I couldn't cope.
It's incredibly stressful, really. It's awful. That's just the worst thing. I mean, it's bad enough, you know, taking the hits and being abused, but then having that baby in your arms at the same time is just horrendous, isn't it? So what help did you or did you not get? So you went to occupational health. I mean, were they helpful?
No. And this is the reason why I started DABS, because you know it's a hospital. It's run by NHS Scotland, and you would expect that I mean, we are going back a few years now, obviously, but you would have expected that you would have received, you know, full support. And the only thing that happened was, quite rightly, because a child was involved in the incident, it was reported to social services, which is the right thing to do. Yeah. And so social services got involved, and that was it. I wasn't offered any help, any support. I said that I needed to set some time off, which I didn't really want, because I didn't want to be stuck at home with her, but I couldn't function in the workplace. So I was in a real catch-22, really. But yeah, they offered me no support at all, zero. The first time I received any acknowledgement that I was a victim, or got any, I was going to say positive feedback, but it wasn't really positive feedback, but just a listening ear, was when I went to see social services. I got called in to speak to them, to explain what had happened, told my side of the story, and I literally, I mean, I sobbed like a child for the whole. I always remember thinking I felt quite sorry for the lady. I could barely get the words out. I was in such a state. And she said to me that she acknowledged that she believed me. And that was the first time that anybody had shown any interest, because of all the time police officers had come out, nobody ever believed me. You know, nobody even asked, really. It was just that. Well,
I think it probably was their policy back then, Rob, that they were probably told that in domestic abuse situations they had to protect the female. They would probably brief that, to be honest, back in the 90s, I would have guessed.
Yeah, I mean, the one is that back in Wiltshire, the police at the time had a policy whereby one person had to be removed from the household to prevent further escalation after they left. And in many of my talks, especially to police officers, I talk about this policy, and I say, well, that on the basis of it, that sounds like a great idea. We don't want it to escalate after officers have left, so one person's got to be removed. Right, well, let's think about this. In that room, when they turn up, one person is in full control of that situation, and it isn't the victim. So when I moved, and we're backtracking here, but when I first moved in with her, she refused to allow me to have my name on the rental agreement, for obvious reasons. You know, it gave her so much control over me. If I said or did anything that she wasn't happy with, I'm out, gone. Yeah. And because I don't have any family in the UK, she'd now be reliant on friends, and it'd all be very, very difficult. So when they turned up, one of the questions was, whose house is this? Now, as soon as those words were uttered, I knew what was coming next. And she said, well, it's mine. My name's on the rental agreement. And these actually were two massive police officers, both stood over me. And in fairness, they said, look, you're going to have to leave. And I said, well, I've got nowhere to go. I haven't got any money. And that's because she was already partially controlling the finances. And he said, look, we'll take you down to the local hotel. We'll work some out. I said, and what's to stop me coming back here, you know, after you've dropped me off? I said, I've just told you I've got no money. And on that, literally, the pair of them jumped on me on the sofa, put me in handcuffs, and dragged me kicking and screaming out of the house.
And which incident was that, Rob, when they did that? Is that back at the...
That was back in Wiltshire. Police officers need to realise when they turn up to a scene, there's one person in control of that situation, and it isn't the victim. You know, if those police officers had taken a little bit more time, had been trained a little bit better, and maybe not had that unconscious bias that it has to be the man has to be the perpetrator, things would have been different. You know, take me to one side, and why why don't you have any money? Have you got a job? Or what, what's going on here? Just being a little bit more curious about what was going on. But anyway, so in Scotland, again, my name wasn't allowed to be on the rental agreement. So when my daughter was born, again, another point of control was that she refused to put me down as a father on the birth certificate. She didn't even give our daughter her name. She gave her her maiden name. So again, this was all part of the control. Now, I did a...
were you married at this point? Were you married? No. Okay.
So as I'm sure you're aware, under UK law, I got no parental rights at all, zero. So I did do a DNA test without telling her. My daughter is clearly mine. If you saw her today, then you would know she's mine anyway. And the test came back as positive for her being mine. So yeah, all these things were there to control me. I had a daughter from a previous marriage, and she knew how much I obsessed about my other daughter, how much I loved her. So that was like the ultimate control, really. I'm not even going to put you down as the father on the birth certificate. So,
and Rob, at this point, when you're in the relationship with your abusive ex, did you have contact with your other daughter? Did you have any contact? Oh, you did. Okay.
Yeah. She was living in Germany with her mother at the time.
Okay. Yeah.
But I didn't have any family here in the UK. So
is that because are you from a military family? Are you, Rob? Is that why you don't have family in the UK?
No. I had a sister moved out to Australia many years ago, and basically the family followed her. And I had literally just joined the army when my parents left, and I've got a brother. I've got a brother in Canada, but that's it. So
okay, sorry.
So after that incident, the breakdown, everything that happened there, I knew I had to leave. I knew that. And eventually I did. I stayed within the very small village, so we were still living on top of each other. But I did get a place of my own and started to get my life back together, really. Little did I know that the worst was now to come. So I was in a flat about 5 minutes from my daughter. I was having my daughter at weekends. Still very isolated in this small village in the middle of nowhere. I didn't have a car, so life was, it was difficult. But I had a job, and
but that's positive that you're seeing at this point. You're seeing your daughter at weekends, so that's good. Yeah.
So I'm seeing her at weekends, and things are looking good. I'm starting to rebuild my life, and then one day, my ex says to me, in fact, I'd also helped her mother, my ex's mother, move up from England to be with her because she was quite worried about her daughter and her behaviour and wanted to be with her. So here I am. I'm doing okay. I'm thinking, all right, life's good. Certainly better than it was. And one day, my ex says, I'm taking our daughter to the park. Would you like to join us? And then from there, you can take her home. So I was like, oh, okay, that sounds good. So I met her at the park. We walked for a bit, and I took our daughter, and I went home. But prior to leaving, she said, "Oh, listen, is there any chance that I can come round later?" And I said, "Why? Why would you want to come round?" Well, to talk things over, and now Mum's here. She's been quite strict with the way things are at home, and I thought maybe we could just talk about our daughter, and just have a chat. This was singly the worst decision I made from the minute I met her to the minute I left Scotland.
You made a couple of bad decisions, didn't you, Rob?
I made a lot of bad decisions. A lot of bad decisions. I'm the king of bad decisions. And I said yes. I was on the up. I felt good. I thought, things are working out.
No, understandable. Yeah.
So she came round, and when she turned up, the first thing she did was pull out some cocaine and a bottle of vodka. And at that point, I should have said, leave immediately. And I said, I don't want you doing that in here. don't go getting that out here. Oh, don't be an effing, boring so-and-so again, straight away. But I thought, no, just play it cool. Don't, because I was actually then worried. And I thought, don't rattle her, don't wind her up.
You're in pacify mode now, aren't you?
Yeah, that's it. And I literally had just put our daughter to bed. So she was in her cot, asleep. And I thought, all right, just, handle this carefully. And I did an absolutely crap job of it, because what happened was she proceeded to get absolutely smashed. And when I did ask her to leave, boy, did it kick off. It reached the point I said, look, enough's enough, you've got to go. And it was just like pouring petrol on a bonfire. She exploded in the living room, grabbed my laptop, threw that across the room, started jumping all over that, knocking stuff off the side. I was going, trying not to use my daughter's names. I was saying, please, you'll wake her up, and can you just go? Look, just leave. And it escalated massively. And she said, I'm taking her. I'm taking our daughter. I was like, no, you're not taking her. No way. So I got in front of the bedroom door, and I was absolutely beaten black and blue. So I was stood in the front of the bedroom door, stopping her from taking her out of a cot. And she literally beat the living daylights out of me. At one point, I managed to grab the house phone, which was close by, and I dialed 999. So I made the first emergency call whilst I was being attacked. So they would clearly have been able to hear what was going on. I was screaming down the phone for help, trying to explain what was happening, that there was a child there. Please get police officers out here. She managed to, literally, as I'm doing this, she's attacking me. She managed to wrestle the phone from me, hung up, and then started literally beating me in the face with the phone. So I'm taking a real beating now. And at one point it got so bad that I moved away from the door. She managed to get in. So she burst into the bedroom, went to grab our daughter out of the cot. At this point, I grabbed her by the clothing, pulled her. She fell backwards onto the floor. I grabbed her by the wrist and I pulled her out of the bedroom, closed the door, and stood in front of the door again. I'm telling her, you're not taking her. And then it just repeated exactly the same. Managed to get hold of the phone again, made a second 999 call, exactly the same as the first time. Exactly the same thing happened. She managed to get it off me. And at this point, I thought, this can't continue. So I literally grabbed the house keys. Again, there was a sideboard very close to where she was attacking me. Grabbed the house keys off there and I ran. And I ran out of the house, or the flat. I ran out of the flat and I locked the door so she couldn't take her daughter because of the state she was in. I was really concerned. And I'd grabbed the house phone as well. So I made another 3 999 calls. The police turned up. I was sat on the curbside. One of them went into the house. One stood with me, questioning me. I appreciate we're short on time here. So to cut a long story short, we were both arrested, taken to the police station and questioned, along with our daughter, who was looked after by an officer. And I there wasn't a mark on her, and I was black and blue. So I didn't even as an ex-police officer, I didn't even think about solicitors. When I was offered a solicitor, no, not interested, don't need one. Look at the state of me. It's quite clear what's happened here. And I told it exactly as it happened. You've got the 999 calls, which are recorded to reference back to. I thought, it didn't even cross my mind that this could go against me in any way, shape or form. I just told it as it was, expected to be let go of my daughter and for her to be charged. Anyway, they took photos of my injuries, and at one point I was left alone. And then an officer comes back and I hear my ex-partner talking in the hallway, and I hear her being given our daughter and leaving. So the officer sits down, and then another officer joins him. And his words were, he said, your partner, and I said ex-partner. He said, your ex-partner's been very clever and she's refused to say anything, so we've had to let her go. He said, however, and I kind of braced myself then. He said, however, you've admitted grabbing her by the clothing, pulling her to the floor, and then dragging her by her wrists. I went, yes, as self-defense for me and my daughter. He went, yes, but you're an ex-police officer. You know that constitutes assault. So we're arresting you for assault.
And they didn't arrest, they didn't, but
nothing.
She can say what she likes, but
no charges, no charge. She said nothing. She didn't ask for me to be charged. She said nothing. And that's from the police officer. She's been very clever and said nothing. So we've had to let her go. So at this point, I'm sat there and I literally cannot believe what's happening. I'm like, I was trying to defend myself, trying to defend my daughter. So it doesn't matter, we're charging you. So I was charged. I was held in a cell overnight. The next morning, I was put in handcuffs in a prison van. I was driven to the local courthouse. I was taken from the holding cells down below the courthouse up into the court, which was packed. I had to stand there in front of the judge whilst I was charged with assault, and I was bailed for 5 months with conditions not to go near my ex or my daughter.
Wow.
And yeah, exactly.
Okay, well, that is a very good example of how damaging and harmful Vogue policy is.
Yeah,
in my opinion.
I can't. Yeah, I mean, that experience, just that experience, that is what still deeply affects me to this day. Forget Wiltshire, forget Hampshire, forget anything else that happened before that, with exception to being attacked whilst I was holding my daughter. What causes me my mental health issues today, which are quite serious, is that one incident. Because the absolute, well, I can't even put it into words how I felt. I just can't explain it.
What constabulary was that, Rob? If you don't, are you able to name them?
Yeah, it's classed as so it was Lanarkshire, which is no, it escapes you. I can't remember who covers that, but it was in Lanarkshire.
So they are complicit in the abuse of both you and your child, aren't they? Basically, that's what they are.
Yeah, in each case, whenever the police turned up, basically, they then became a tool of the abuser.
Yeah, absolutely.
Every single time the police came out, they became a tool of the abuser. They're basically being manipulated by the abuser, and through policies and procedures that have been put in place or gender bias training, they then become that tool of the abuser. And if the victim's a man, he's just being further victimized. So, and then I was let go. I was allowed to leave the court, and 2 weeks later, I tried to hang myself. I went home. Yeah, I went home, and I just I didn't see a way out. I just didn't see a way out. I thought I was going to go. I had 5 months to sweat, 5 months that I couldn't see my child, and I thought if I can go through that, go to a police station in the state that I was in, and still be charged, what hope have I got the day I go to court? So I thought I was going to prison. It's as simple as that. I thought I'm never going to see my child again, and I'm going to prison. So it was one weekend. I sat down. I was drinking heavily. I wrote goodbye letters to my 2 daughters and to my family out in Australia. I even wrote a warning letter, which I put on the front door, warning whoever it was that forced entry at some point, warning them what they were going to find and apologising for the fact they had to deal with it. I put a rope round the rafters. It was a flat, but I had a loft hatch because it was the top floor. I put a rope there, continued drinking, and eventually got on the stool, put the rope around my neck, and and I rocked the stool really hard and just let out this scream. And the stool, instead of tipping over, just kind of rocked and then righted itself. And I remember standing there in the dark, just again crying like a child, just thinking, you know, she's right. I'm effing useless. I can't even get this right. And then, really importantly, I started to think about my eldest child, who'd always had the opinion that people who committed suicide were selfish. Now, she doesn't hold that opinion anymore, but she was a teenager back then. So, and I started to think about it, and I thought, she's never going to forgive me. She'll never, ever get over it and forgive me for doing this. And eventually I got down off that stool. So really, my elder daughter saved my life for that, really.
Wow. Gosh, mate, that's just the depths of despair that you must, the sheer hole that you must have been in, the darkness. Just honestly, I just can't bear to think what that must have been like.
And that's why I've you know, what happened during that period is something I've never got over. You know, I don't. You probably have to cut this bit out. I don't think it should go out, really, because I want to leave it with a positive message. But you know, every day is a fight. You know, every day I think about suicide. You know, I hate the person that this has turned me into.
Yeah.
You know, I'm a shell of the. I'm unrecognisable from the man I used to be. It's ruined me. It has ruined me completely.
It can be the making of you as well, though, Rob. Because I mean, like, you know, the fact that you know, the courage that you've shown. I've seen some of your YouTube videos and your TikToks and your social media stuff, and you know, that amazing video that I watched you put together about seven or 8 months ago about your mental turmoils, and very emotional. But you know, don't underestimate the power of what you do and what you're saying now. And although it's awful for you, I hope that you can take some positive out of it, in terms of you wouldn't be able to have the effect that you have now because of what you've done. I'm trying to be positive for you, but do you see what I'm saying? That's what I'm saying. Like,
no, you're 100% right, Nick. I mean, when I gave my first talk purely by accident, and a lady came up to me at the end of the talk and said, "How far do you want to get into this?" And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" She said, "Well, you know, where do you want this to go?" And I said, "Well, I don't want it to go anywhere. I'm happy to come and give the odd talk just about my experiences, you know, in the hope that it'll help others and change attitudes towards male victims." And she burst out laughing, and she said, not in a bad way. She burst out laughing. She said, "It's just a matter of how far down the rabbit hole you want to go." And I think I can safely say that I'm right at the bottom of that rabbit hole. Do you know what I mean? I made the decision. Talking about it has definitely made it worse for me, my mental health. But I made the decision very early on. I said, because I am so passionate about it, I said, look, if I can manage my mental health, you know, and it's good days and bad days. I said, if I can manage my mental health, then I will keep doing this, because I don't ever want anybody, you know, male or female, to go what I went through. And I want to educate people about what domestic abuse is. So I'll continue to do that. But yeah, I mean, it all culminated really 5 months later. It all came to a head 5 months later in the courthouse. I turned up at court, and my solicitor walked straight up to me, and he said, "You can go home." I said, "What do you mean I can go home?" We hadn't even been into court. We were in the courthouse, but we hadn't been into court. And he said, "The charges have been dropped." I said, "What?" He said, "The charges have been dropped. There's no case to answer." Those were his exact words. And I just couldn't believe it.
Well, there wasn't a case to answer, was there, Rob? There wasn't a case to answer. That's the bottom line.
Well, see, obviously at first I was absolutely over the moon. I couldn't believe it. I was like, "Oh, that's amazing." But I'll be honest, that very quickly turned to anger, because I thought,
absolutely,
I came so close to killing myself. For what? And basically, after doing a little bit of digging, found out that Police Scotland at the time were being heavily criticised for not being tough enough at domestics. And they were told they had to take positive action. And for them, on that night, because I'd admitted, grabbing her by the clothing, and because she kept her mouth shut, it basically was just easier for them to charge me than it was to charge her. So that's what they did, with absolutely no thought whatsoever to the consequences of doing that. And this is one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about speaking to police officers, particularly senior police officers, trying to get this message across. So that was it. It was over. And just before we left the courthouse, she walked over to me. She came over to me and she said, "Oh, it was me that got them to drop the charges against you. I told them that you're not a bad man, really." And I just remember standing there looking at her, and she said, "Don't worry, you don't have to thank me," and then walked off. And I still have her now. She found out about the work I was doing through social media, and I got a text, I don't know, a couple of months ago, maybe longer, saying, "When have you ever been abused? Don't you think you're taking this domestic abuse work too far?" Yesterday I had her on the phone, having to deal with that, and it's just, it'll never end. But the important thing for me, on a personal level, is to get this message out. But obviously, the most important thing for me has been my daughter. The reason I've never gone off at my ex, my abuser, was because I've always wanted to keep it on a level playing field for my daughter, so that she wouldn't be affected. I couldn't have gone through people say, "Well, why didn't you sue for custody?" Well, I'm not down as the father on the birth certificate. When I left Scotland, I left with nothing. I left with a rental car that I hired with £1,000 that I'd borrowed. My brother in Canada wired me £1,000 so I could rent a car and get back down to England and try and sort myself out. And I left with 4 small boxes of stuff. That was it. That was my life. Having when I met her, had my own place for 8 years, a lovely place, my own business, etc., etc. So for me, then, it was about keeping it on a level playing field for my daughter. And thankfully, with the help of my ex's mother, who is an absolute superstar, who I still talk to occasionally now, my daughter's grown up. She's a happy, healthy kid who's doing incredibly well at school, and that is the most important thing to me. And obviously she's an 800-mile round trip away. I see her during the school holidays. That's the best I can do, and it's far more than many men out there get. So I'm very grateful for that.
Okay, and so the daughter that's 800 miles round trip away, that's the one in Germany?
No.
That's the one in Scotland. I beg your pardon.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. So it's just over an 800-mile round trip to get her.
Got you. Yeah.
Yeah. My daughter, who lived in Germany, she's all grown up now, and she lives in Australia now. So.
Okay. So the daughter that's in Scotland, you get to see her.
Yeah. The daughter I had with my abuser, I get to see her during school holidays. Yeah.
Okay, and you've got a healthy, positive relationship with that daughter.
Yes. Yeah. We've always had a really, really good relationship. So, so I'm very lucky in that respect.
Right. Well, thank goodness you stuck around then, mate.
Yeah. I mean, the good, one of the positive things is that my ex, my abuser, she won't stop me from seeing my daughter, because if she did, I would stop paying her maintenance, because I don't have to pay maintenance because I'm not down as the father on the birth certificate. But she is my daughter, and it's only right that I do pay maintenance. And she knows that if she stopped me, then seeing her, then I wouldn't pay her a bean.
Yeah.
Simple as that.
Yeah.
So
you have as little to do with your abuse now as possible.
Yeah, but when you've got a kid together, it's difficult.
Okay.
But yeah.
Do you mind if? Well, listen, that's a really positive side to the story, as we come to the end of it now. But I'd like to just go back, if you don't mind, Rob, about, you did mention when you had your breakdown, the sort of first time you had that sort of breakdown at work, and you had occupational health that helped you. But then at some point, there was a referral to social services. Do you mind just telling me a little bit about how helpful? I think you said they didn't really do a lot, but did they not act at all when it was disclosed to them that this was going on?
Yeah, thanks for picking up on that, actually. I'm very conscious of the time, so there's bits I've missed out. So what happened was I was interviewed first, and then they called my abuser in to be interviewed. They spoke to her, and then I was called back again. And when I went in for the second meeting, the woman said to me, there are two types of abuser. Bearing in mind, this is going back a while now. She said, we see the people that know what they're doing is wrong, and they want to work to change their behavior and become better people. And then we see the abusers who do nothing but blame the victim. They say it's nothing to do with them, it's all the victim's fault. And she said, your partner is the latter. She said, my advice to you is to go home, pack your bags and leave. She said, but I can see in your face you're not going to do that. And I just kind of looked at her, and she knew I wasn't going to do it. So she said that the reason she gave for attacking me whilst I was holding our choking daughter was the way that I'd asked her to hand her over. Simple as that. She said that I was so abrupt in the way that I asked it. She said that that's why I did it. And importantly, she said, and the social lady from social service, she said, she actually told me and said to me, she didn't feel it was a big deal. And those are the exact words. She didn't feel it was a big deal.
You see, on the one hand, I'm thinking they seem to believe you, plus point. And then the second thing is, so they must recognise that they've now got a child that's in danger and in need of protection. But their answer to that is, you need to get out. So you, as the protecting parent, need to get out.
Yeah, exactly. Now, they did carry out an investigation. They deemed that my daughter wasn't at risk. So she wasn't removed. I wasn't given custody. And again, there was that whole issue. I wasn't down as a dad anyway, so that wasn't going to happen. So that was it, really. As soon as they felt that she was safe with her mother, they drew a line under it. Simple as that. So yeah, that was the end of that part. But yeah,
the one thing I was going to say about the work that you do and others like yourself that are very strong advocates and speak to the services about hopefully training them to be better, is like, my view is you'll rarely change an abuser and their behaviour, but what we can change through advocacy is the services. So whether it's social services, the police service, the charities, because this dominant gender narrative, as we've seen through your story and others that I've heard and my own story, is until we find a way of being much more neutral about this, people are going to get discriminated against, and it costs lives.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, our number one aim for all of us doing anything in this sector, it should be the same, and that is to end the cycle of abuse. And until you're willing to acknowledge that there are a vast number of female perpetrators out there who perpetrate domestic abuse against both men and women, unless you're willing to acknowledge that and deal with that and offer support to those perpetrators and the victim of those perpetrators, the cycle of abuse will never end. And it'll just continue to come around. And you know what? I'm quite happy to say it on camera. I think that suits a lot of organisations out there, frankly. Yeah. Because of the amount of money involved, wages, offices, etc., that are involved in this, I think it suits certain organisations perfectly.
Agreed. Yeah, agreed.
So my message, because I know we're probably running short on time, but my message to anybody out there suffering from domestic abuse, it, in particular, obviously, because of my story, men out there. As a former military police officer, as a security professional, former security professional whose job was to protect people, don't be ashamed to come forward and get the help that you need. Help is available. Speak out, to talk to somebody that you know and trust, because once you've spoken to one person, it then makes it easier to speak to others. Right, but don't bottle it up. Don't think that things are going to get better, because most of the time they will continue to get worse. All right, stay safe and reach out and speak to someone you trust. Help is available, and please don't feel ashamed to come forward.
Lovely, Rob. That seems like a really good sort of place to sort of end it. Just finally, have you got any recommendations? I mean, you've obviously had very challenging mental health circumstances yourself, as well as domestic abuse. Are there any services that you can recommend that we might be able to signpost, maybe?
Yeah, I think one of the big issues at the moment is the lack of funding, lack of manpower. One of the things I keep hearing repeated is that when people do phone up organisations, they have problems getting through. So I would say any organisation that you come across, please understand how busy they are. Yeah. I know that you're in a difficult position, but persevere and keep trying.
Yeah,
for men, I always recommend Mankind Initiative. I know Mark and his team and others there. They're a small team, but they're incredibly dedicated, an incredible team. Men's Aid Ireland out there doing fantastic work, and there are so many out there doing fantastic work. If you're a woman suffering from domestic abuse, obviously Refuge or Women's Aid. But for men, definitely. First and foremost, I always recommend Mankind Initiative. Speak to your local council if you can't get through to them. If you can get into your local council, go and have a word with them and see if there are more local services that can support you.
Yeah. Have you ever found the GP helpful at all, Rob? Is that? Would you recommend GP?
I spoke to my GP a few years ago. I was put on antidepressants, which I found made things a lot worse.
Right.
I took myself off those and decided to just deal with it.
Okay.
So, in a word, no. Okay. Unfortunately.
I think GPs are recommended, but I know services can be variable. So, for various reasons.
Yeah, and another thing, we've obviously not talked about DABs and what we do in the workplace, but just going back to what happened to me in the workplace, I think businesses have to realise, the huge financial cost of businesses across the UK as a direct result of domestic abuse. And if you're running a business, if you're a manager in a business, and your organisation doesn't have a domestic abuse policy and gender neutral or gender inclusive training in place, then really you need to take a good long look at how your organisation is run, and you need to get that sorted, because it's such a vital part of your employee wellness program. Yeah.
I think if you get a trainer and they start banging on about predominantly women, be careful about what you're being told.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't know whether you're going to put this in, but in the last couple of days, we've seen the Employers Initiative on domestic abuse, who've done some great work. They're a huge organisation, but having Jess Phillips as a guest speaker, somebody who is responsible for leading, everything that's gone on with the build up to the new Domestic Abuse Act, leading the blocking of male victims and the organisations that represent them from attending the consultation process. She was at the forefront of that. And I don't think we need to look any further than what went on in that consultation process to know how biased the system is against male victims and the organisations that represent them. Because quite frankly, I think what happened there was criminal. Absolutely criminal.
No, agreed.
And the Employers Initiative on domestic abuse should really take a good long look at themselves for having they should have been absolutely grilling her and asking her the most, difficult and probing questions about why she's not inclusive of all victims. And if they weren't willing to do that themselves, they should have invited another guest on who was willing to put those points forward.
Yeah.
We cannot have gender bias in society, and particularly in the workplace. It's not the way to do your training.
No, if we're going to fight it, much better to fight it together, not in a divisive way. I totally agree with you, Rob. Right, well, look, listen, that's an incredibly powerful story, Rob. I'm really pleased that you've agreed to share that with us at FTD Talk. I'm going to make a great addition, I'm sure, and I hope there's going to be people that listen to that, take some encouragement, some hope out of it, and draw from your own bravery. Really, I think it's incredible what you've been through, Rob, where you've been and where you've come from. And I know it's still a test for you, mate, but on behalf of all of us, we're all with you, mate. So we definitely support you and right behind you all the way.
Well, I really, really appreciate the opportunity, Nick. Thank you so much for having me.
All the best, Rob. You look after yourself.
Cheers, Nick.